Most people think intelligent people are people who know a lot. But in reality, what makes them different isn't the amount of knowledge they have. It's the way their brains connect pieces of information that seem unrelated. They see patterns, while other people only see events. That's why they can often predict a problem before it happens, while most of us can't. And the price of that, sometimes, hurts more than you think. There's a feeling that almost everyone has experienced at least once in their life. It's the moment you realize something too late. A relationship ends, and you're stunned, while your friends aren't. They say, "I saw this coming a long time ago." That feeling isn't just surprise. It's a quiet question that keeps coming back to haunt you at night. Why am I always the last one to know? Maybe you've answered that question this way before, because I don't have enough information. If that's true, the solution sounds very simple. Just pay more attention. But what if that's not true? Part 2. Your brain was never designed to notice everything. Try to remember the last time you drove home after a long day. By the time you parked, you suddenly realized you couldn't remember the last 3 intersections you'd passed. You weren't dozing off. You didn't lose consciousness either. But your brain had quietly decided that information wasn't important enough to bring into awareness. Psychologists call this inattentional blindness, a temporary blindness to what's happening right in front of your eyes when your attention is focused elsewhere. Maybe right now, as you're watching this video, your brain is also missing something important. Not because you're careless, but because millions of years of evolution taught it to do exactly that. Filter out what seems non-urgent, to save energy for what seems more urgent. The frightening part is, you will never know what you just missed, until it's too late to call it a sign anymore, and can only be called a consequence. And if you don't actively fight that mechanism, you will keep calling things that could have been predicted surprises. So it turns out, it's not that you lack information. You were there. You heard every word. You were just looking in the wrong place. And that's also why, once again, you'll be the last one to know. But if the problem is only about looking in the right place, is simply paying more attention enough? Part 3. The hidden patterns behind every decision. There's a strange paradox in how people remember breakdowns. We tend to remember the final detail very clearly, yet misunderstand the real cause the most. You remember exactly the last thing said at that dinner, the tone, the look in their eyes, even the silence that followed. But the question you asked afterward, what did they do wrong, was the wrong question. A veteran ER nurse, walking past a hospital room, doesn't look at the monitor. She glances at the patient for a second, then stops and calls the doctor immediately, even though every reading is still normal. 30 minutes later, the patient takes a turn for the worse, exactly as she predicted. She didn't see the future. She saw 5 small signs, each one meaningless on its own, but together telling a story that the machine, measuring each number separately, could never see. That's a bias with a name of its own. The fundamental attribution error. You tend to explain a breakdown by someone's personal fault, instead of looking at the structure and pressure that had quietly led to it. Because finding a culprit is always easier than admitting that an entire system had cracked, including your own part in it. That last thing said wasn't the cause. It was only the final drop. So it turns out, even when you remember very clearly, you can still misunderstand. And that's another reason you're always the last to know. Not because your memory is bad, but because you remember the right detail, the wrong picture. But suppose you've learned to see the system. Is that enough yet? Part 4. Why you need to pause before you react. A text message pops up at 11 at night. Just one sentence. But within 3 seconds, your fingers have already typed out a reply. Sharp, quick, and one you'll later wish you never sent. You're not a hot-tempered person. Normally, you're someone very calm, someone who listens, who thinks things through. So why, exactly in the most important moments, do you react the worst? Pilots are trained for exactly that moment, when a warning light suddenly comes on mid-flight. The first instinct is to pour all of one's attention onto that exact light. Researchers call this attentional narrowing. attention suddenly narrowing to a single point to the extent that a person can miss everything else happening, including the fact that the plane is losing altitude. That's why training procedures always include a step that seems, at first, absurd. Stop. Scan the entire control panel before reacting to any single signal. You also have your own control panel. And that text message at 11 at night was exactly one warning light. You stared straight at it, reacted immediately, and forgot the entire picture you'd seen just a minute before. The person who sent that message, everything the two of you had been through, what you actually wanted for this relationship. Seeing the system doesn't automatically help you react correctly, because in the most tense moment, you can still be pulled straight back into reflex, exactly when you need to be calm the most. What's still missing isn't another perspective. It's a pause. And this may be the deepest reason you're always the last to know. Not because you don't see, but because you see too late. Only after you've already reacted that you manage to look back at the whole picture. But suppose you already had that pause. Are you sure you're solving the right problem yet? Part 5. The dangerous comfort of quick answers. In the 1970s, two psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, ran a strangely simple experiment. They had participants spin a number wheel, actually rigged to stop only at 10 or 65, then asked, "What percentage of African countries do you think are members of the United Nations?" Those who saw the number 10 guessed on average around 25%. Those who saw the number 65 guessed on average around 45%. A completely random number, with no relevance to the question at all, still pulled their answers off course. This is called the anchoring effect. Once the mind has latched onto the first piece of information, everything that comes after is judged based on that anchor. You might be carrying a similar anchor right now. Work stalling? You immediately think, need to work harder. That answer isn't wrong, but it comes before you've truly understood the question, because the feeling of already having an answer is always more comfortable than continuing to live with uncertainty. The real question might be, am I stalling because I lack discipline, or because deep down, I no longer believe in the reason I'm doing this work? If you've ever solved a problem, felt relieved for a while, then had it come back, wearing a different shape, that's not because you didn't try hard enough. It's because you spent all your effort correctly answering the wrong question. And this is another form of being the last to know. You not only realize the problem late, sometimes you never even realize you were solving it wrong until it comes back a second, a third time. But suppose you've asked the right question. Is that enough for you to actually move forward? Maybe, right now, you've also just remembered a problem in your own life. A problem you've tried to solve for years. And for the first time, you're starting to ask yourself, could you be answering correctly the wrong question? Part 6. Why understanding alone isn't enough. There's a stretch of time, after a great loss, that almost everyone has been through. When you already understand clearly how everything happened, you've stopped blaming anyone, but you still find yourself standing still, not moving anywhere. That's because understanding something only explains the past. It doesn't automatically give you somewhere to walk toward. The human brain, through evolution, always gives loss more weight than possibility. That's negativity bias. After a loss, almost all of your attention gets pulled into what's been lost, not what could come. Think about an athlete who has just gone through a serious injury, lying in a hospital bed, unable to move their arms and legs for weeks. What they do, it turns out, isn't just waiting. They close their eyes and train in their mind. Every movement, every breath, imagined in such detail they can almost feel the muscles moving. Sports psychologists have documented this in many athletes. When they simply sit still and visualize in great detail, their bodies still improve almost as much as if they'd trained for real. The brain, to some degree, doesn't clearly distinguish between something vividly imagined and something actually happening. That means you don't need to wait for things to get better before you can picture a future. You can start picturing it, in detail, specifically, even while the present is still in chaos, and that very act begins pulling you forward. So it turns out, even if you've understood everything correctly, without a future image clear enough to walk toward, that understanding can still become meaningless, and you'll keep being someone who knows exactly what happened, but never knows where they're going. But suppose you've rebuilt that image. Is being right enough, on its own, to change the people around you? Part 7. Why truth alone never changes anything. Have you ever told someone, directly, exactly what they needed to hear, with complete sincerity, and gotten back a wall instead of a nod? Psychologist Jack Bram called that response psychological reactance. When people feel their own views are being imposed upon, they tend to cling to their old beliefs even harder, even when the evidence shows they're wrong. You were right, but your being right, arriving too fast, too directly, might be exactly what closed the door. The other person doesn't need to hear your truth first. They need to feel safe first. And this is perhaps the most subtle form of being the last to know. It's not that you didn't know the truth. It's that you only realize, much later, that being right isn't the same as being heard. So it turns out, even if you saw correctly, understood the system correctly, paused at the right time, asked the right question, and held a clear vision, all of it can still fail if you bring it out in a way that makes the other person become defensive. 6 things that seemed separate, it turns out, are all pointing in the same direction. Part 8. The invisible habit that changes everything. Go back to the feeling at the start of this video, the moment you knew something had changed, too late, and the question that once haunted you. Why am I always the last one to know? You've just gone through 6 moments of being flipped. You thought just seeing the right spot would be enough. It wasn't. You thought just seeing the right system would be enough. It wasn't. You thought just standing at the right altitude would be enough. It wasn't. You thought just asking the right question would be enough. It wasn't. You thought just understanding correctly would be enough. It wasn't. You thought just being right would be enough to change other people. That wasn't enough either. 6 times, the same thing was revealed. You can get one step right and still react too fast at the next one. Because what truly stands behind all 6 of those things isn't knowledge or skill or intelligence. It's a pause. A pause. To pay attention to the right thing, instead of letting your brain automatically filter out what matters most. A pause. To find the structure, instead of rushing to blame a person. A pause. To choose the right altitude, instead of getting pulled back into reflex. A pause. To doubt the first answer, no matter how comforting it is. A pause. To remember that the present is not the future. A pause. To let others catch up and walk with you, instead of being left behind. And finally, a pause between what just happened and the person you choose to become. People who always seem one step ahead don't have a different brain from you. They've simply practiced long enough to create that pause, the place where you, like most of us, usually only have reflex. And here is the best news in everything you've just heard. If that's a habit that can be practiced rather than a gift you're born with, then the distance between you and the kind of person you've admired or envied has never been as far as you thought. It doesn't require you to become someone else. It only requires that the next time something happens, before you react, before you conclude, before you assume you've already understood everything, you give yourself a pause. Just one moment. Perhaps that's exactly where every real difference begins. And perhaps that's also the last time you'll have to ask, why am I always the last one to know?